Batsirai Madzonga has had a charmed career in design from humble beginnings to becoming the AVP of design at one of the UAE's biggest banks. Batzy is a design leader, creator of the Ubuntu Framework for building design organizations, the inventor of the Google font Sankofa, which has been downloaded millions of times by designers all around the world. And did I mention he's a 9-time author? Batzy is such an interesting guy, and we honestly could look on for hours and hours. So without further delay, let's get into the episode.
Batsy, welcome to the show. And look, I think we want to just kick off first by asking you to tell us a bit about your career journey, right? Because I had a look at your LinkedIn and I've kind of been following you over the last few years, right? And it's been quite an interesting journey, but love to hear in your own words, just like how it's changed and how you kind of got into design and, what led you to this path.
Yeah, thanks, Jay Warren. Thanks for having me. So I usually like to describe my journey in 3 phases. And the first phase was essentially that really gave me the foundation that's allowed me to last so long in the creative space and enjoy it as much as I do. And that was when I graduated and started a company with a friend of mine in Zimbabwe, where we're living. Essentially, it was a design studio that did everything from web development and all things that creative related, so in the advertising industry, marketing, etc. So it really gave us a really deep and wide breadth of exposure and experience. We had to learn a lot on our own. We had to stay on our feet due to the kind of economic situation in Zimbabwe at the time. There was hyperinflation, life was really difficult. But the result of that was people had to start businesses to survive, essentially. So they had to supplement their income with being enterprising. So this formed the core of our client base, right? With just ordinary people starting businesses and side hustles that needed logos, websites, business cards, company profiles, brochures, printed, all that kind of stuff. So it allowed us to do business development. We did a lot of pitches to CEOs, boards, and regular people. We did a lot of presentations around trying to show what value we can bring to businesses, right? And we did this for 5 years strong, and that really gave us, I think, some of the tools that I still use today within the roles that I've worked, where I approach every role I'm in with a very entrepreneurial nature, because that's the DNA that I kind of founded in those early days. So when I work somewhere, I treat it as if I'm in client services, business development. I'm doing all of those things in various ways still, even today. And I think that's what really helped me when I then moved to the second phase, where I was now an individual contributor at advertising agencies working in South Africa. So this allowed me to kind of rise from being an IC. I was promoted to associate creative director within like 9 months of arriving at that agency. And I just grew from there. And I think a lot of those qualities leading and growing a business allowed me to then move to a position where I was trusted with leading a team at the agency when having arrived 9 months prior. So that was my IC phase, leading in from South Africa to Dubai. And then now I'm more in my design leadership phase, you could say, where I've gone back to that place where I'm using all my IC knowledge, all my entrepreneurial foundations that I built, and combining those where I'm now leading a team, growing a design department, having a real passion for outlining the future and the vision for what digital design should be within my organization, and earning the trust of all my senior leadership as well, because they're essentially entrusting me with our number one platform, right, for consumer interface, which is our apps and our websites. And these are key platforms for the business's growth. And they're entrusting the design team with building out experiences that will either make or break the success of our digital platforms. So I don't take that responsibility lightly, take it quite seriously. And that's at the stage I'm in now.
Yeah, no, it sounds like a really interesting career journey, Batsy. And I wanted to dig a bit deeper into because I'm sure there's listeners out here that have been thinking about starting their own agency, or maybe kind of branching out into doing an IC role and becoming a bit more entrepreneurial. Are there any kind of learnings that you took when you was doing it back then?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because I did it in a very specific time and place under very different circumstances. So even now, I typically wouldn't think about going back into like entrepreneur because it's really difficult. It takes a lot of time to gain the trust, to win business, to network. It takes a lot of time and effort. When I did it it was a victim of circumstance, right? In Zimbabwe, there was super hyperinflation. Our currency was failing, and people needed our services as a form of necessity, right? So it was a lot easier for us to go into that place um, and establish ourselves as a partner to their success whilst providing them the services that we were growing at the time. Whereas if you're doing freelance in the context of Dubai, it's a little bit different. And I've seen people that have done it successfully, and I've seen people that have failed and come back to being an IC. So I actually don't really have a solution to how to actually go into it now, because I think I'm far removed from that world, unfortunately. But I would say, if I was to say one thing, I would say build your brand whilst you're still an IC. So build up a portfolio of work, build up your own confidence, build up your own brand of thought leadership and design excellence, and then go out and try and win people afterwards. I guess that's the one thing I would say.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, that's a good point, because obviously branding is key, right? And I think, yeah, like you said, if you built up that reputation already, people will bring that trust as well, so yeah, I can see that. And I guess, yeah, it was a different time for you back then. And no plans to ever do that ever again? No, you just wouldn't ever do it again?
No, I think I have very different interests now, which kind of brings me back to that third phase of my career, where at the beginning of my career, because I've always been very religious and spiritual, and at the beginning of my career, I told myself that I would go out to the world as a child of God and glorify His name with the work I did. Whereas now it's become more two-dimensional than that one dimension, where I'm now an African child of God. So I'm putting myself forward. You'll see with my brand and the personal projects that I do are more centered around trying to highlight. I guess what I'm trying to say is, me being African is what makes me special at this point in time. And that's the value I actually now bring to the world, where I'm seeing that the journey I just described a few moments ago, all of that happened within the African context. And that is experience that a lot of design leaders around the world obviously don't have, because they don't have that African perspective, the African moral values that I grew up with and worked in, and the communal and community structures that I also not only grew up in, but I still benefit from today. So yeah, I've kind of transitioned away from, no, I probably won't go out and kind of do freelance or that kind of stuff. I'm now focusing more on, how do I elevate the African message on a global scale? That's kind of what I'm focusing on now.
That's been very noticeable as well, like in the content that you post, the work that you've been doing, the impact that you've made. Like especially like with the books on kind of learning Shona, and then you've got your kind of
Yes.
Google font that you've released recently, and the success of that.
there was definitely that kind of emerging theme, to be kind of more kind of African focused, kind of elevating it, giving it more kind of presence in the design world. You mentioned something extremely interesting, which was you want to bring African values to the forefront. Like, I suppose, like, what are those values, and how do you see them changing design or helping designers?
I made this realization about 2 years ago when I kind of took a step back and tried to see if I was to give a contribution to the creative space, which I'm a lifetime lover of, right? How would I do that? And the only way I could really think about offering a different perspective was to leverage my Africanness, right? And there's this concept called Sankofa in Ghana. It's like a word in the Twi language in Ghana, in Ankan language, which essentially means to go back and return to the past. And the concept is there is a certain honor that's involved in going back and getting lost knowledge that would be otherwise lost and bringing it back into the present and marching forward with it to the future. And you see a lot of African ideals, African cultures, a lot of that stuff is being lost and distilled and diluted with globalization. And with designers that are focusing more on Western ideals of design as the North Star, right? Things like minimalism and less is more, that kind of rhetoric. We're losing a little bit of what makes us special. So Sankofa really came about where it allowed me to take a step back, look at my past, look at my heritage, and see what aspects of that I can pull through and offer that to the world as my contribution. And in terms of what I decided to focus on was in and around the communal structures, the culture, and the moral value systems that are prevalent within Africa. The biggest, most prevalent one is Ubuntu. And the more research I did on Ubuntu, the more I found that it's not just a Southern African concept, which is what I initially thought. It's more of a much more Pan-African concept. And you see this through like different iterations or manifestations of the Ubuntu concept on the African continent. So you'll see in some areas, they call it Ubuntu, Bantu, Gimuntu, Mutunchi. There's the very different variations across the entire continent, but they all point to the same idea, which is humanness versus individualism. So all of this to say, I tried to find a mirror, like what does Ubuntu look like within the context of the organizations we work with? And I started to see a lot of parallels between the individual. So I broke it down into four, where you have the individual, you have the individual's family, then you have the community that family lives within, then you have the wider interconnectedness that the communities share. And within companies, that typically looks like, yeah, you're the individual contributor, right? It starts there. Your family tends to be, in our case, your design team. That is the immediate family that you share. Those are the people you interact with the most. That is your family. And your community that family operates in tends to be, again, in our case, the digital department, digital factories, digital transformation teams. We're now branching out to product engineering, design, and at times business stakeholders also form a part of that core community. And then that community then operates within the wider scope of the organization, right? So digital as a community works with risk, compliance, legal, Sharia, marketing. We then form different communities within the whole organization. So I then tried to find ways, like, to answer the question, how did Ubuntu become so successful in Africa? Because even today, African societies have a much more communal view than Western societies do, which are more focused on individualism. And it's allowed us to have this fabric of connectedness and oneness that I felt was lacking in not only just the Western world, but in the companies we work with today, with internal politics and everything that happens day to day. So the Ubuntu framework I then created tries to mirror the success the success Africa has had in building communities, and mirror that to give a framework that will help us build successful digital products by leveraging those value systems that are in African communities and trying to implant those into the communities and organizations and the families we have in our workplace.
That is so deep. Like, I didn't realize how deep that actually went. Because a lot of the time when you hear that, people have said, we've just set our values for the team, right? Like, I run the design org, we've created these values, or a senior stakeholder, it might be a CPO, says, your team has to have values, go define them. And then everyone workshops these values, and then they come up with a list of things, and then no one looks at it forever. And I think that's because a lot of shadow thinking kind of goes into it. And I think a lot of kind of community design, community ideals maybe kind of go into it, or like you said, Western ideals might go into it, rather than deeply thinking about it in terms of, well, what does it, like, what do our values mean? What do they represent? And literally taking it from somewhere that maybe has a proven track record of it kind of being successful, and like what you have. A question that triggers for me is, how were you able to bring that into the organization and introduce it? Like, we should be operating in this way. We can learn from the Ubuntu kind of way of working, building that community.
Yeah.
How did you introduce that to the company, especially being in this region, and like, what was the reaction? And I suppose, how's it going?
Well, you got to buy the book. But essentially, it's a good question, and what I realized is these are things that I've been doing my whole life. I just hadn't kind of taken stock and looked back to see to actually see how I executed it, because it's essentially part of my DNA, having grown up within the African context, right? So it's things like building relationships, and leveraging design, like documented design processes that focus on connectedness and community. For example, you have workshops, design sprints, stakeholder huddles, those kind of structures that are already embedded within our teams and we're doing every day. But trying to see, how do we start off with the individual and the family, bringing our best self within that day-to-day construct. So that's why I found it very important to focus first on the individual, because if you can bring your best self to your team, then each person can do that. And what you find typically in families is we know what people are good at, and that's what we push them to achieve within the family construct. So you have some kids that are great at certain things, some kids not so much, but we try and find the best out of each family member and put that across to the wider community. And that way the community always sees the best that comes out of the people within the fam. When I say family, I'm referring to the design team in our context. So as a head of design with my team, my job is to find what is my team best at doing at an individual level, and then allow them to shine within that context. So when the wider community looks inwards into the design team, they're seeing the best of each individual. And that's what I'm trying to leverage. And when you then extrapolate that to the whole organization, I'm putting forward my design team within the organization, and leveraging what they're best at doing. And that's how we build trust with our stakeholders, because they know that the design team is great, and that's spread over different disciplines. Like I have some people that are great at workshopping, some people that are great at usability testing and talking to customers, some that are good at design advocacy and design systems. And that's what they become known for within the teams and the company. And then I try to leverage it that way. And then when we go out into the company, we're remembering that we're part of a larger community, right? And everything we do tries to serve that community. And I saw this a lot at Emirates MBD, where maybe this is a coincidence, but I don't think it is. So the chief digital officer at the time when I was at Emirates MBD was actually also from Zimbabwe, where I'm from. And he grew up in the same context that I did. And one of the mantras he had for the digital team was, our business is to make your business better, essentially. Like our job is to make your life easier. And he used to say that often, which brings back that idea of, as a family, as an individual, as a community, our job as digital is to make everyone else in the business's life easier. And you see this through how we automate traditionally analog processes and make them digital, how we improve the systems within the organization when it comes to efficiency, cost savings. All of that is done through digital automation, digital innovation, right? So it's literally our job as the digital department within any organization is to make the rest of the organization not only function better and more efficiently, but because the touch point our customers have is with the things we're building, it's a very important service we're providing, not only to the company, but to our customers as well. And again, you see a lot of parallels with community building within that, because as a healthy, functioning community, our job is to serve other communities. And this Ubuntu gets a very philosophical as well, because it talks about not just the human part of it, but the environmental aspects as well. But I won't get into that now. But the idea is it's a wholesome look at how do we make our role as a community is to make everyone else's life easier. So I see a lot of parallels there, and that's what we try to do day to day. And that's kind of how we bring Ubuntu to life, essentially.
It's fantastic, Batsy. Like, I love the idea of using cultural references to bring that into your current day to day, right? And there's always something that stuck with me that someone said, right, is that any creativity comes from your learned experiences, right? And it's great to see that that's what you're bringing
For sure.
with this into this, and applying it to your leadership style as well. You spoke a lot about different parts of your leadership, right? And I'd love to dig a bit deeper into that. Like, what does leadership, what are some of the other things that are important to you as a leader, and how have you kind of also used your cultural references to bring that into your leadership style?
Yeah, interesting. My leadership style. So there's this organization called Uncommon back home in Zimbabwe. And their goal is to connect people in otherwise underprivileged otherwise underprivileged backgrounds, and connect those people with mentors that came from the same place or a similar background, and connect the mentor with the mentee in order to bring up the people back home. And I was connected to them, and I met up a couple of years ago with one of the mentees when I went back home. And what he said to me probably is the seed of why I'm doing the things I'm doing now. Because what he said was essentially just seeing me having gone abroad and done something that I loved and reached the heights that I have reached, where I'm head of design for like $1 billion bank, right? Just seeing that someone that looks like him, someone that came from where he came from, someone that grew up within the same context that he does or that he's growing up in, has actually broken off and achieved that height, gives him hope that he can do it too. So is this idea of like he's seeing himself represented on the global stage, and that allows him to have hope and confidence in himself that he can pull it off too. And when he said that, I actually realized that again, that chief digital officer at MSMBD had done the same thing for me, because he was a Zimbabwean who was CDO for $1 billion bank, that could have picked any chief digital officer in the world that they wanted, but they chose him. And he looked like me, came from where I came from, spoke the language that I speak. And that really showed me that, hey, I can do it too. I'm not a victim of being an African is not in my Achilles heel. It's actually what makes me special. And that's when I guess I started to go down that path. So yeah, I think in terms of leadership, why I feel like what I do is important is it sets that North Star for people back home, not just in Zim, but in Africa, to say, we can do it too, right? I'm an African, I'm Black, I'm Christian, but I'm heading design at a Islamic bank in the Middle East, right? Those two seem like oil and water. But I think where they come together is the human aspect of it, where if you go in and you build communities, you build relationships, you go out with an authentic intention to help other people, then that resonates. Doesn't matter what culture you're working in or what country you're working in or what company you're working with. That human core truth of community that we all yearn for, I feel like that is universal and that'll take you places. That's why I'm trying to build that Ubuntu framework to teach people why the power of community is so important and the wonders that it can do for your career. And as far as my leadership style goes, I'm actually a very hands-off type leader. So I'm jealously guard the people I bring into my team, because I know that I will trust you to give your best and do your best. So I'm very hands-off, but I try to also motivate people by leading from the front and kind of trying to set a bar for excellence that they can all aspire to, essentially.
I think
Yeah,
that's fantastic. I think that representation is definitely something which is extremely kind of important. And I didn't have quite the same kind of experience, but I have had comments like I became a head of design at a bank quite early on in my career. And I did have a lot of people who were from African backgrounds and Caribbean backgrounds that I would meet at meetups or even in my own team say that, like, because we see you here, we feel like we can do the same thing. And when I heard that for the first time, I was just like astonished, and like it kind of just makes you kind of realize like the impact of being in these positions. And I suppose like, even more so like kind of being over here, I feel like with yourself, with your kind of former CDO, I feel like it takes a certain mindset and forward thinkingness to see past the differences that people have and see kind of what's inside them that you really want to bring to the forefront because you believe it will elevate your organization. And it does make me think that, do you think that kind of forward thinkingness of like senior leadership is unique within this region, where they're more open to kind of give kind of people from different backgrounds and religions to them those opportunities because they see the bigger picture? Or do you think that that is something which is also seen in kind of other places around the world?
It's interesting because I think Dubai and maybe Abu Dhabi as well, or UAE as a whole, where we all know that expat community is much larger than the local community. So I feel like maybe it's a mirror of just how culturally diverse the place is. So you tend to pick the best out of the best out of what you have, right? And that tends to be very multicultural in the end. So I've seen a few design leaders that are actually African in the UAE, but I've also seen some that are British, European, and Southeast Asian, etc. So yeah, I think that's just probably a mirror of just how culturally diverse the country is.
Yeah, and I think, when I look at that myself personally, I think of my team, I've got like probably 12 to 13 different nationalities within one team, just the design team, right? And, when I lived in the
Yeah,
UK, I think we had a little less diversity. Most people were from the UK, British nationals, and just seeing the difference, having those different cultural backgrounds and different ideals, I have to say that it does spark a lot more, what's the word I'm looking for, creativity and innovation, in the discussions that we have, because people come with such different views, right? And I wonder, Batsy,
exactly.
maybe leaders that have hired people in these different positions as well, do you think that has helped drive innovation in organizations, especially where you've been in the banking sector, for example?
Yeah, that's a very good point. And we have a running joke in my team, because my team is the most culturally diverse in the entire organization. Because I have people from India, Africa, Lebanon, Palestine, Brazil, the UK. So it's literally a rainbow of different personalities, different backgrounds, different life experiences. And I think that's what makes it beautiful. And that's why when we have workshops and we ideate and come up with ideas and even just hang out, the conversations we have and the insights we get from talking to each other are global. I think that's a real superpower that we.
Yeah, and in terms of that, Betsy, like, is that something that you would, when you're hiring people or when you're kind of building your teams, is that something you take into account, or are you looking for that diversity, or what's your thought process when you're kind of building out your team?
No, so I don't actually. I don't necessarily focus on the diverse part. I focus more on the person, the individual, I guess you could say. So I think it just so happens that it turned out that way, that we're a really diverse team. But I try to focus on finding people that have the right mindset. And that it just so happens that, it's resulted in a culturally diverse team in my case. But yeah, I tend to focus more on mindset than anything else. So you tend to find the people in my team have the same mindset. So they're all very driven, very ambitious people, super friendly, super likable. So I can send them out to represent me and the team in meetings and stuff. And I don't have to worry about the relationships they're building, whether they're burning bridges or mending bridges, right? I know that these are great people with a great attitude, that ultimately, at their core, are very authentic people as well. Because I think being authentic is super important, because we have a sixth sense as human beings when someone's not authentic. So I try and use my gut feel when I hire people and try to find people that are very authentic, very down to earth, likable, and have the right attitude. And it's just so happens to have translated into me hiring from basically every continent. The only one I don't have is Australia. Still need an Australian.
I think that's easily done in this region. There's quite a few Australians either here or planning on coming here, so for sure. How do you assess for mindset? Because I know you've shared quite a few thoughts online about the hiring process. I think we can kind of go into that in a second. But
Yeah.
something key that you mentioned was mindset is core to how you hire. And I suppose, like, how do you assess mindset in an interview process?
Yeah, it's a question that I've asked myself, honestly. I don't have an answer. The only thing I think is, or the conclusion I came to is I've worked with creatives for my entire life, essentially. And I've worked closely with people my entire life. So it's hard to quantify it, but I would just say it's a gut feeling, more than anything. Like when I have a conversation with someone, I can tell what their mindset is by the answers they give, how they communicate their ideas, what they want for their own lives, how what ambitions they have in their personal lives and in their professional lives. All of those things, I think it's a combination of all of those small um, pieces of information that then craft a web where I can almost accurately paint a picture of who this person is and what they represent. So that's why, like you're saying, my hiring process, I've been posting lately about that because I've been trying to create a structure where I can systematically interview people and actually bring out the pieces of information that I deem the most important, without having a tedious, long process. So now I look at the person's CV and personal brand. So that's the first thing I look at, your personal brand. If you have a personal brand, that already tells me something about you, right? That you prioritize your personal development and you can present yourself in a professional way digitally, which a lot of the times translates to relationships and the physical world as well. Like if you can build a digital presence that says something about who you are through your personal brand, then that already tells me that you're one step closer to what I need in my team or the kind of mindset I need. So I tend to filter the CVs I get through that lens first. Then obviously look at your professional experience and all that good stuff. I don't really look at portfolios that much. I think I mentioned this a couple of days ago on LinkedIn, actually, because no one, I mean, I've worked for so long in creative where people have come to me for help with their portfolios or design tasks. With Mid-Journey and AI now, you never know who worked on what. So I don't really look at portfolios because I have no proof that the stuff on your Behance you actually worked on. And so I tend to not to focus on that, but I move on to the interview more, where in the interview, I try to suss out everything I've just mentioned. And then I can tell by our interaction whether you'll be right or not. And then from interview, then I typically have some kind of task that I ask you to do. If you're in the country, we usually do a whiteboard session in person, to gauge how quick you think on your feet when you're being asked questions. How do you interact with people in the team? How do you present your ideas? How confident are you to stand in front of the design team and present your solutions? Failure to do an in-person whiteboard, then I've started to give tasks that aren't design related, but more mindset related. So recently I posted the 5-year timeline task where I asked, I think we shortlisted to 4 candidates when I was hiring last month, and each of them had to do a design task where they mapped out a 5-year timeline of who they are today, who they want to be in 5 years, and actually have a detailed action plan of how they're going to get there. And that's the first time I did that, and it was very successful because I could tell from the difference in the level of thinking for each candidate, the level of ambition. I could also tell where they are in their life, and if I was equipped to help them on their journey, 5-year journey. Because I also want to, like I was saying before, with the community and the individual, my job is to serve my team. And if I feel like I'm not equipped to serve you on your 5-year journey, then our relationship won't be what I want it to be. So that gave me that insight as well to say the person I'm going to hire, I'm actually equipped to help them get to where they want to go. So it's a give and take relationship. Because I do believe that I work for them; they don't necessarily work for me. Because I'm their leader, I'm supposed to empower them to go where they want to go. So that's kind of my process at the moment.
I think that's so cool because a lot of the time we just stick to what we know or what we've been through on our own kind of experiences through the hiring process, and we think, okay, well, I was given a whiteboard task, so maybe whiteboard tasks are what we're kind of meant to be doing, right? And we're not doing a level of thinking that you are necessarily in terms of what is it that we really need and how do we bring that information to the surface as quickly and efficiently as possible, to kind of see how that deep level of thinking is being applied by each candidate, and then you can accurately kind of compare and contrast against it. I think that's really cool. It's definitely something that I would like to try at some point. I think that'd be interesting to see kind of what the results would be and the answers that you would get as well. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of interesting reading kind of involved there, which is
Exactly.
quite cool. A bit.
And why I think it's important also in the selection process is that those are the kind of tasks and activities that you cannot prepare for, because there isn't a YouTube video you can watch on how do you ace a 5-year timeline design task. You won't find it, right? Whereas you'll find a lot of videos on how to ace a whiteboard challenge, how to ace a design. So I want things that will allow the candidate I'm interviewing to take a step back and actually think about something on their own independently, without having the wealth of videos on YouTube to help them come to that conclusion. So that's why, I feel like it's important to step outside the boundaries of the typical design and recruitment process and just think outside the box as a design leader. What can I ask this person that they could not have seen coming? And but not only that, the reason I also wanted to do the 5-year timeline thing was it's an artifact that even if they don't get the job with me, it's an artifact that they can use in their own lives after the fact. So it provides value to them and value to me as well. I felt like that was a crucial part of the equation that's been missing in our recruitment process, because usually you find a lot of conversation now about exploitation of candidates where they're being given live briefs and they feel exploited because they're not being paid to solve the company's real life design problems. Right, and this is a running theme online right now, where designers are feeling exploited because they're working on live briefs as part of the interview process. And I felt like that was wrong. Like, why couldn't we create a system that still gave us the information we needed about the candidate, but also gave them a lot of value on the other side of it too?
Yeah, I like that, Batsy, because like you said, thinking outside of the box and not sticking to the norm, trying something different, right? And I think, we often get stuck in those processes that exist. And on the ethics side of it, right, that you mentioned, about those tasks being used. Obviously, I know this is like a hot topic, but is it as big of an issue? I always ask this myself. It's more of a question to myself. I ask this, right? Like, is it as big as an issue than we think, or do you think that designers are maybe, inflating this problem more than it is? That maybe one or two companies did something, and then people are expecting other companies to do the same. Do you feel like it's, I don't know, is it a bit of a red herring, or what do you think?
No, so I think what happens is like what Jay said, right? The industry creates a process and everyone follows that process. So if one company, like you're saying, if one or two companies give a live brief and get 20 possible solutions to their actual design problems, you're getting people to work for free. And that's a culture that then spreads like a cancer across the industry, and it just becomes norm to say, hey, we've got this problem. Let's get people to do a design challenge, and we'll get some ideas, and maybe we'll hire someone at the end of it too. So we're hiring someone, but we're also getting 20 potential solutions to our real life brief that we have. So I think it is a problem, and it is exploitation in one way or the other. Whether or not designers should be crying foul, I come from a very different place where I tend not to focus on the negative side of things. I tend to be very positive. So when I've been in those situations and I've had to do design tasks, I've never complained about it, because I'm trying to get a job. This is the process in front of me. If I'm doing work for free, so be it. But it's an opportunity for me to show them how I can actually give tangible value to the actual problems that this company has. So if I come out as the person that did the best out of the 20 that gave this task, then so be it. That should be my goal, right? To show how I can actually give you value. I mean, what use would it be if I was interviewing for Airbnb and they gave me a car parking challenge, like design an app for car parking? What does that have to do with how can I show tangible value to that organization if I'm doing a completely unrelated design task? So I think you're right. I mean, in some cases, I would say, yeah, it's being blown out of proportion because you want to prove your mantle. So work on a live brief. At the same time, if they're going to make you work on a live brief, then maybe they should compensate you for the time and effort that you're putting towards solving their actual business problems. Maybe there's an argument there as well that I've seen where, especially there's a recruiter called Tom Scott. He's quite active also on LinkedIn, and he speaks about this. If companies are going to give you live briefs, then you need to compensate people. So I don't know where I sit, honestly. I mean, all I try and do in my own, as a design leader in my own right, is to have empathy to designers that feel that way. So I try to create a neutral space where if I'm going to give you a task, it's going to be beneficial for both of us. And that's kind of where I sit.
I think there's a thin line, isn't there, between giving them the opportunity to show value and exploitation. Like I've
Yep.
experienced it in a not too distant past where I was given a design brief to kind of solve a challenge for a company, and I didn't hear from them for about a week. And then literally the following week after that, they told me that they used my design challenge for a client, and it and actually won them work. I did end up, yeah. I did end up getting the role there, but I did at that point before they made that offer. I did at the point of being informed that my work in that challenge was used. I did feel exploited at that point.
That is very unethical.
Wow, like everything that you hear, everything you hear online, like it can actually happen, and it does actually happen. And so for me, I don't like the idea that you could be using or profiting from somebody's work for free. I do agree with you on the whole mindset thing. I do, like, whenever I go through hiring processes, when I'm trying to hire for my teams, mindset is the goal that I'm trying to achieve and understand most. So it's less about what the solution is that they come up with. It's more so about how they think through the problem, kind of how they approach it. That's what I'm trying to uncover. And at the moment, to date, it's been more so leveraging whiteboard challenges, which are kind of in person, where you can kind of work and collaborate with that person, see how they think, get them to ask questions, understand their assumptions, challenge them a bit and see how they react to challenges, because that's what's going to happen in the business, right? Stakeholders are going to challenge them, and if they react negatively, or if they can still be positive, or if they can challenge back, these are key things that you can really identify about someone's character. So I'm quite akin to those kind of challenges. But when it comes to we're experiencing this problem, solve it. It doesn't align with me. However, I agree with you, Batsy, in terms of I've been in that situation where it's been obvious that we're solving for them, but because you need a job or you want a job, you just roll with it. And if you end up being the best candidate, then so be it. It's well deserved in that instance.
I just say this, guys. I think where the problem I see is it's less of a candidate issue. I think it's more of a business issue, right? Because I don't know. I think it's almost a little bit embarrassing that you feel you have to give out these tasks to inexperienced designers that have no context of your organization, right? And you're using their work to get your stuff done. I would be a bit uncomfortable with that because I don't know, like they don't have the business context, right? And to your example, Jay, where they hired you, right? Let's say you turned down the offer, right? And then they've gone and used your work, promoted it to a business, and that business is taking on that business, saying, okay, we're going to get this level of quality or this output, and then you're not even going to be there, right? So how do they back it up then? How do they follow up that project? So it's like
I don't think they care at that point.
Yeah.
So don't they also open themselves up to litigation when they use your work for client work, and then you could potentially actually sue them for that because it's still your copyrighted material in the end. It's your IP because you don't work for them.
Yeah.
And you didn't sign any contract saying.
Well, I think when you're a young designer, I think you are probably not necessarily more likely, but you are definitely open to being exploited more. Because you may not have had the industry experience or those experiences to kind of build up those scenarios in your mind where actually, this isn't right. This is exploitation, and we should do something about it. I think when you are younger, you just think this is just the way it is. Like, this is part of the process. But it's not until you get older and you've had some life experience you actually realize, no, that's wrong. We shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah, I'm just hoping that as we speak out as design leaders, as we talk a lot more about this and put our perspectives out, that designers will know how to navigate those waters. And also maybe companies will start to change the way they do their recruitment and some of the more borderline unethical practices that are happening, that they'll start to change over time. But it just takes one company to set that stage and change the way things are done. And if you, as a designer, have interviewed at one of those companies and another is trying to exploit you, then you will see the difference. You'll know the difference. And hopefully you're not in that desperate place where you just need employment, so you let yourself get exploited.
Yeah, some great points there, Batsy. And I wanted to also talk a bit about yourself because you talk a lot about these things on LinkedIn, and I've always been following your posts, and it's really great to kind of see how you speak about some of these topics. Is that something that you find important? Making sure that you're out there giving that kind of feedback to the community, giving back on LinkedIn. Is that something that you're quite passionate about, would you say?
Yeah, I think it is important. I started doing it more as a way to not necessarily give back, but just to give my perspective on things. Because I felt like that was an important part of my own personal brand as I was building that up. I spoke a little bit about how important it is to have a personal brand, and the way the industry perceives you is what really propels you as you try to achieve the goals you have set for yourself. And one of the goals I set for myself was international speaking opportunities, going on stage and talking about design. That was a personal goal I had. And the first thing I guess that made sense was I need to put my perspective out there in the world and see how people will relate to the things I have to say, if people agree with my perspectives. But also, again, going back to my Africanness, It's my outlet for giving a different perspective as seen from an African perspective. So I think it's important for those things, for those reasons, and also, like I'm saying, as a way to show people back home that it's possible to be a thought leader in the design space, if you come from where we come from. So I think it's multifaceted, it's multi-layered. Why I feel like my social media presence is important, and I guess also I enjoy it. Because a lot of the times it's unplanned and unscripted. I would just be, it's almost like a reflection of what the thoughts that are in my mind. Because a lot of the times I'll just be thinking of something, and then I type it out, and you just throw it on the wall and see if it sticks. And I guess people have started to resonate with some of the ideas that I have, which oddly enough is actually now steering me more towards certain ways of thinking. Oddly enough. So it's that coming back to that idea of like communities and how we shape communities. You find that the perspectives that I put out that people resonate with, I want to do more of that stuff. So as an example, the design challenge in the interview process that we've just been talking about, I put that perspective out into the world and it resonated with the design community, which told me that I was onto something. And that I should probably try and do more work around changing the recruitment process for designers and doing things that aren't being done, but also doing things that will serve the community more than just serve me as the hiring manager. So yeah, it almost like serves as a litmus test for me to see what ideas should I, at this part of my career, what stuff should I be thinking about? What stuff should I try to disrupt and change? And then the more it resonates with people, the more I can kind of realize that, okay, maybe I'm onto something. So it also kind of helps me guide my own path in life. That's what I get out of it too.
Yeah,
It's
no,
almost
I
like
love
your
that.
research.
Yeah,
Do a bit of
it
research
is.
first.
It is people to kind of use the research for sure.
No, I was just going to say, Batsy, another thing that I felt that you promote a lot is some of your personal projects as well. Like, I know we spoke a little bit about, the Ubuntu framework, but, when we look into the other books that you've been doing, you've done like, I think 6 or 7, maybe more, right? 8 books, like more personal projects around things
9.
like Shona, right? 9. That's right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, where did that come from? And like, I'd love to dig a bit deeper into that, and I also understand, how you even have the time to like put all these things together.
Yeah.
That's a good question. Yeah, so that came from a personal need. So my kids have not grown up in Zimbabwe, so they didn't grow up surrounded by Shona and Shona culture, especially because an important thing to note is the correlation between language and culture. And there's a lot of nuance that happens within our languages that translate into how we treat people, how we interact with people, how we think about people. So as an example, how you talk to your elders back home in Zimbabwe is really shaped by the language, first and foremost. So how you address people older than you, there's certain ways you do that in Shona versus your peers and people younger than you. And that aspect of respecting your elders is actually baked into the language itself. So it's something you grow up respecting your elders because your language dictates that you respect your elders. That's just one example of what my children missed because they did not grow up within that Shona context and within that Shona culture, right? You see a lot of a big disconnect with English with this regard because we watch sitcoms, we watch American TV, British TV, and 9 times out of 10, the young people are disrespecting the older people. You see kids shouting at their parents, calling their parents by their first names. You see kids rebelling on and they present it in a humorous way if it's a sitcom, but the underlying message is kids don't respect their elders. And that's baked within the English language itself. So yeah, I felt like there was a disconnect between how my kids were growing up and how I grew up. And every time that my daughter would learn a Shona word, she would light up. And it's almost like she found something within herself that she was missing. Because at her school, for example, there'll be like 2 black kids in a sea of Indian and Caucasian white kids, right? And they all have long flowing hair. She doesn't have long flowing hair. So she really sticks out within that context as well. So speaking Shona, learning Shona words really brought a sense of, I guess you could say, belonging. So she understood who she was, where she's from, that she is actually different from all these other kids where their common language is English, right? That's what they have in common. So I then realized when I kind of took a step back that I'm not the only parent with this problem. Every single Zimbabwean that has kids in the diaspora living abroad has this exact problem. It's not a problem that's unique to me. And then AI happened. Generative AI allowed me to actually create high quality imagery and illustrations that I otherwise would have had to pay a professional to do, which was always my barrier to entry because I needed quite a large budget if I was going to roll out a his and her book series, with high quality. Because I'm a creative. I have high standards. I didn't want to just create an illustrator myself because I'm not an illustrator. So when those AI tools came about, I realized I can create 2 characters, one for my son, one for my daughter, and actually draft a book series fairly easily with Midjourney. Because I can do a lot of the book layouts myself. I've been doing that my entire adult creative life. I can write the story because I speak the language. I can prompt and create images myself. So it all just came together a couple of years ago when Midjourney and generative AI really came to the fore. So that gave me the creative outlet to achieve the goal I had of having my kids have something that they could anchor their identity on. So that's what where the book series came from. It's a platform for kids that come from Zimbabwe that allows them to anchor themselves within the context of being out in the world, not knowing who they are, where they really do come from, and the kids that are missing out on these African ideals that, frankly, I take for granted because I grew up with, but they're so important. So that's why I did it. And where do I find the time? I don't know, honestly. I don't know. I guess I'm playing with the kids, sitting there on my laptop, making books and writing stories. I guess you multitask, right? You do what you have to do, and then you also do it with them. So my daughter is listed as a co-author on one of the books because she helped with the story idea. She came up with the idea for the story itself. She helped me choose the book cover. So she was involved in the process. So I can also spend time with them while we're doing the project, which I guess is double benefit there. So yeah, that's why. But I get this question a lot.
Absolutely
Like, where do I find the time to do these things? Honestly, don't know. I think I also work on it
It's a
after hours
superpower.
when they're asleep, especially the vocal font. Yeah, I was working on that after hours.
No, I think it's remarkable. I think one thing I've loved about kind of you and this conversation today is just how deep rooted and intentional everything that you do is. Like it's not, it doesn't come across as like superficial or I'm just doing it because I saw someone else doing it, or I'm doing it because I want some sort of fame, or like I want to profit. Of course, like a lot of these things can come as byproducts of what you're doing, but the essence of what it is so deeply rooted in kind of where you're from, culture, the community that raised you. I think that's just incredible in terms of like inspiration. Like if anyone's thinking about, embarking on a journey outside of their kind of 9 to 5 job, or even like bringing ideas into their workplace. I think it encourages people, including myself, to just think even deeper about what it is you're trying to do, and like think about like, well, what is it about your experiences that have made you unique, that will also add value to others that may not have had those experiences or even have had similar ones. So I just love how deep rooted everything is, and I think it's fantastic. And I think that also leads to what you've done recently with the Google Fund as well. I know that was like almost like a year long project. Again, like I'm sure you're going to say it's deeply rooted in terms of like how it kind of came about. I would love to kind of hear more about it and that journey. What made you want to create a font, and why is that important? What was it like working with the Google team on it?
Yeah, you're right. So it is part of a larger project I started in 2020 during COVID, called Sankofa. So I explained what Sankofa represents, which is return from the past, return to the past, kind of learn from the past, get from the past. Essentially, look within yourself for inspiration. Look within knowledge that's otherwise lost, and have that influence your future. There's this quote I found from the African Journal of Social Work when I was doing this research, and I think it underlines the essence of this project that I started, this Sankofa project. I'll just read it out. It says, "How about promoting African knowledge, theories, ethics models, frameworks, stories, orators, voices, languages, and methods of telling? How about developing a theory from your analysis from the bottom up instead of using existing theories that might not be very relevant? This knowledge you did not learn at college, but they define a type of social work happening in your village, suburb, town, community, chiefdom, or home. Those impactful personal experiences no one except us will write about." So this is an African, obviously it's the African Journal of Social Work. And it really resonated because that's the essence of what I was trying to achieve with the Sankofa project. And it's not just an African project. It was starting from an African place because I'm African, but it was meant to be a beacon for any creative in the world that is suffering from the same cultural dilution that Africans are, right? Because you have creatives in China, Japan, Colombia, Cuba, all of the South American countries that are all striving towards Western ideals of design and not focusing on where they come from and leveraging that as their special sauce. So that's what Sankofa was about. I did a design system, like a UI kit, based on African design, color palettes, typography is where the Sankofa typeface came from, because the typography section of the design system was the display typeface that I created in 2020, that I launched in as part of that wider Sankofa project. So that's essentially how it started. And 3 years later, actually, like last year, Google reached out because they coincidentally had a project where they were trying to promote and have more African typefaces from African designers on Google Fonts. So you have a lot of African languages that require specific letter shapes and glyphs in order to represent the phonetic spoken language of those countries. And this is what Google was trying to promote, right? So it's that idea of taking knowledge that would otherwise be lost and putting it on a digital platform and immortalizing it, right? So if we don't digitize these African language writing systems, they're going to be lost to history. And that's essentially what Google's trying to do. So they reached out, and I already had Sankofa typeface. So part of the project was taking the 180 glyphs I'd created and allowing a language support of 933 languages across the continent of Africa and Asia. And that meant taking it from 180 glyphs all the way to over 1,000 glyphs in order to support those 933 languages. So yeah, it was amazing because it's being funded by Google. I was allowed a lot of resources, so courses that they paid for, books that they bought me, but most importantly, they connected me with consultants who were charging an hourly rate, and Google would pay for. And they are basically PhD level, lifelong typographers. They live and breathe typefaces. So just being connected with them and learning from them was invaluable. And I think that made the process a lot more rewarding because I'm talking to language experts in Vietnamese, for example, because the font had to support Vietnamese languages, the African experts as well for African languages. It was so cool just to see, like, it almost like they tore open a veil to a world that I did not know even existed. Like, these people are through and through typography. It's a love story to typography that I didn't know existed, and it's a whole world of people that design typefaces and that work to get languages that aren't supported within the Latin character set and bring those on. And it was all being championed by Google, which I thought was very powerful. So it was quite eye-opening just to see how the other world, the world of typography that I didn't even know was that extensive and that amazing. And to be a part of that community for 7 months was pretty cool.
That's insane. Like, how did you feel when? Because obviously you created the font, and then it was kind of just there. And how did you feel when Google reached out to you, saying that they're actually taking on this initiative?
I felt seen.
Mm.
That's the best way I could describe it. And I oddly enough, I posted on LinkedIn a few months in. I wrote a post to the effect of that I felt seen as an African designer, and that it was very powerful for big tech to acknowledge Africa in this way. And the feedback I got from Google, one of the executives from the Google Fonts project, they actually told me that someone within the executive saw my post, and it had an emotional connection for them, because obviously they're not us, they're not African, and they don't feel what we feel when we're seen in that from that perspective, right? So it's something that they just, I guess that person just realized, wow, this runs deeper than they initially thought. So it was very rewarding. I felt very seen, and it was aligned with my objective of being African on the global stage. So I felt like this project would help advance that agenda for myself. So that was exciting for me as well. Yeah, and I felt also a part of legacy as well. Like, I could tell my kids that I worked on something that had literally a global impact. Because when you look at the stats now, it's been served about 1.6 million times through the API. It's featured on 500 websites. I've started to see blogs, those blogs of 10 fonts you should use in your design. I've actually started to see it pop up in those, which is pretty cool. So yeah, it's been received really well, and I'm super happy.
Amazing.
To the point
That must just
where
feel
actually,
amazing.
It is. Well, I've had those kind of things done before with my work. So I've been on like blogs and top 10 designs of XYZ. So I'm kind of used to that. So it doesn't elicit the same emotion as it did like 10 years ago when I first appeared on someone's blog. But I think now I guess it's for a completely different purpose, where before it was advancing my career. Now it's advancing the African agenda on a global stage. So I guess it's different things. But the reception has been great in the Middle East as well. Because now I'm actually working on providing Arabic support for it as well. So I'm expanding the character set to support Arabic. Because there's a designer that when he saw Sankofa, he said, "Hey, there's this writing style called Kufi, where that's like a geometric script for Arabic, straight lines, 90 degree angles, just like Sankofa is with the Latin characters, right? Because they're all straight lines. So it's mirrored quite well if I adopt the Kufi Arabic script style and have Sankofa represent that. They're essentially just a match made in heaven. And which is funny enough also because it's Sankofa and Kufi together makes Sankufi, which is almost like serendipitous, just makes sense. So yeah, it's been pretty cool. I'm now working on the Arabic version. After I launch the book, then I'll focus more on the Arabic.
Looking forward to seeing that in the wild, for sure.
Amazing stuff. And it's very inspirational. I think for any designer out there, to kind of create something like that and it being recognized on such a global scale and be able to work with such amazing people as well, it's quite rewarding and inspirational for me, at least. I'm sure other people will find it super inspiring as well. Yeah.
They have. So I did this talk with Design Matters. They had an online talk in a couple of months ago, like 2 months ago now. And they had this breakaway session, which is pretty cool, almost like a speed talk or speed networking format, where there were about 30 of us on the call. I was one of the speakers. And then they had breakaway for 15 minutes. You would do like 90 seconds where they pair you with 3 random people, you talk, and then you move on to another 3 random people. So it was very cool to meet creators from around the world. And I presented the idea of the Ubuntu framework on that, and the idea of Sankofa, learning from and drawing from your culture to kind of create an identity for yourself. And a Colombian designer who was one of those speed rounds actually said that message really resonated with her as a Colombian, because she was at the point in her life where she also wanted to champion her culture through one of the projects she does, and really champion the traditional Colombian aesthetic and design from her home country. And I was glad that message resonated with someone that's not African, because that was the whole point of Sankofa in the beginning, to use Africa as a platform, because that's where I'm from, but also as a message to say, if you're a designer from a completely different culture that's not Western, you need to champion those ideals and those art styles. You need to champion that within whatever you're doing, because that is what makes you special. And we don't want our digital world to become this black and white minimalist dystopian system that doesn't reflect the culture, the diversity, the vibrance, the textures that exist in our physical world. So yeah, I found that quite rewarding to have someone else resonate with that message.
And off the back of that, Batsy, you spoke a bit about that dystopian future. Can you tell us a bit more about, where do you see the future of design going, based on what you've been speaking about?
Yeah, so I had an answer for this question. It's a good question. And I thought I had an answer for it until AI happened. So my answer now is, who knows where it's going to go? What I do know is it's not going to be what it is today. That's definitive. Because the way AI is evolving and exponentially, the improvements that are happening exponentially, it just boggles the mind to see. It's almost like futile to try and predict what the future will hold, especially for the creatives. I wrote an article about 4 years ago with the emergence of AI and what that meant for creatives. And the whole point of the article was trying to debunk the idea that AI and machines can never be creative. And I did some research on this, and I gave some examples to show that what we call creative, I think you mentioned Warren earlier, and I caught this where you said it's essentially our past experiences that drive our creativeness, right? So when we're talking about diversity and diverse teams, those different life experiences are what offer different perspectives. And that's what we essentially call being creative, right? And when you look at AI and machines, they've got access to all the knowledge that's ever existed. Well, maybe not ever, because we've lost some of the knowledge, but they've essentially got all the knowledge that's online. All the work that's been done by human beings is available to these machine learning platforms and these large language models and these generative AI models, right? So it only serves to show that they will undoubtedly be more creative than we could ever be. And I don't subscribe to this idea that machines cannot be creative, because all creativity is seeing pathways that are otherwise not obvious and making sense of them. And I think AI can do this much better than we ever could. So where do I see design going? I see it being disrupted. And this is part of why I see it becoming obsolete. And I think this is why I wanted to focus on the human aspect of design. So the Ubuntu framework is basically divided into two. So there's the theoretical and the practical. And the theoretical deals with the human connections, the emotional aspect of design, the connectedness of design, and the theoretical side of what Ubuntu represents and is. And then the practical is how do you take those things and actually design using those principles, using the tools that designers already have, like user research, benchmarking, market research, customer data analysis, all of those things that we already have. How do you leverage those and kind of supercharge them using the Ubuntu value system? So that's why I wanted to focus on that, because if the practical side of it is being disrupted by AI, what I see not being disrupted is, in fact, if anything is getting enhanced, is the human connection, right? So if you look at, let's take a radical example of Neuralink, Elon Musk's neural implant company, right? Where they're trying to enhance our biology using tech. If you take an example like that, the practical applications of it is that we're going to create a more connected species, right? So if we have a direct link using Neuralink, if you have a direct link to our thoughts and you communicate using that interface instead of using your words, it effectively increases the outputs that we're able to convey, right? Because you can essentially communicate using unfiltered thought. I've always said in my case that it's much quicker to design in your mind than it is with your mouse, because you can iterate 50 designs rapidly in your mind and move things around, which is the process I actually tend to take. I tend to just sit and design in my head before I even touch my mouse because it's quicker. If you can convey that using neural implants, that does create ultimately a more connected species. So I find that if you look at what's being disrupted and what we could potentially kind of transition and move into, it's a more connected people. It's a more connected society where technology is what we're using to connect us. And I feel like if designers can learn that skill and learn to harness it, then you can be disrupted in your day-to-day work and your day-to-day output, but you can then leverage your human connection to create other career paths that we can't even imagine today. this is similar to the social media revolution. I always give this example where before really Facebook and it disrupted the social media space, we had things like MySpace and stuff like that. But it's really when Facebook came about that it really opened up an entire avenue of professions that didn't exist before. Because now you had social media marketers, you had community managers, you had strategists dealing just with social media. You now had paid ads that were tailored to social. You now had your data and analytics, your psychological aspect of social media. It opened up $1 trillion industry just from that one idea of how do we connect Harvard students on the Facebook at the time, right? This is all about human connection. So I feel like, yeah, focusing on human connection and trying to, as a designer, think about how can you create a more connected society. It doesn't matter what evolution happens within the design space. That human truth will always be there, I feel, where you're designing for human connection. So the Ubuntu framework is meant to give you tools to empower yourself to know how to deal and work in communities and enhance communities. And give value to communities. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. No, I think some really thought-provoking answer that was. I'm still just kind of going over some of the neuroscience stuff in my head as well. Like it completely makes sense, and those connections and how we interact with businesses and organizations and projects in the future.
Yeah,
I think it feels like we're far away, but it will get to that, right? It feels like it's going down that path. We're already seeing like the VR experience is really trying to kick in, companies trying to create those connections from different parts of the world. I feel like you're probably onto something there, Batsy. I think it definitely is something that is going to be the future of where we're heading to.
I actually don't think it's that far off, eh? Because an interesting thing is how to think about this AI revolution is there's a difference between linear growth and exponential growth. And what we're seeing with AI is exponential. And it's hard for us to rack our minds around exponential growth because we understand very linear growth. And an example that I love in the AI world of just how exponential this growth can be is that there's a Google AI platform and research team that was focusing on stable materials. And essentially, they discovered millions more stable materials than otherwise existed. Right? Because I think before we had around 300,000 stable materials known to man until now. And then when large language models came about and we were able to do research leaning towards that AI platform, we discovered 2 million more in the space of a few months. Right? So that's exponential growth. If you'd asked a scientist 3 years ago, how long would it take us to synthesize 2 million stable materials? They would have told you it's not possible. Simply because through linear progression, we were only able to come up with 380,000 from, inception of tech till now. So I wouldn't say it's going to take a long time. Because with exponential growth, I feel like it's an imminent change that will happen within the blink of an eye, and we won't even know that it's coming. Because all it takes is a research paper tomorrow that says this machine learning platform has figured out how to create a neural implant within the human context, and that research then goes into human trials. 1 year later, we've got it in our systems. So I'm very wary to not underestimate the exponential growth AI gives us. So I feel like it's sooner rather than later.
It does feel like that. It does feel like it's around the corner, to be honest with you. Neuralink is quite frightening, but at the same time, it's quite exciting in terms of the opportunities that it might unlock in terms of like human potential. Almost like a Limitless scenario, if you're familiar with that movie. Where
Yeah.
you just open up, you just unlocked your mind, and you're just capable of anything, which is scary, but also, like I said, exciting.
And what's crazy is I was watching a podcast for the guy that they implanted the first chip in. He was talking about the unexpected results of the chip in his head. So because it uses machine learning, it's actually now able to know his intent before he even thinks about it. So the example he gives is because he's a paraplegic, right? Can't move below his neck. But with the chip in his head, he's able to play games using his mind, right? So the way he describes it is initially he had to think about moving his hand or moving the cursor, and the cursor on the screen would move. Right? So think about it. I want to go left. He goes left. Now he's had it in his head for a few months, and because it's continuously learning, it knows his intent before he even has to think about it. So now the result is when he's playing games, because he plays like Call of Duty and shooters, it's almost like an aimbot, because you're walking around a map and you're supposed to shoot other people, but his cursor will move before he even thinks, because it knows what his intent is going to be. And
Wow, so his
that was
reaction
just
time
like
is probably like 10x.
it's insane. It's insane. It's inhuman, I guess you could call it that. That's essentially what it is.
That's a
So
superpower,
yeah, I
man.
think let's
Because
not underestimate
phew,
what
that's crazy. That's crazy, man. I'm definitely going to look more into that interview as well, and because I can just see the possibilities in terms of even in that gaming experience. As soon as your eyes see it, your mind is already there. Whereas before,
yeah.
you'd have to be reactive and reliant on your motor skills in order to make that aim in time and take the shot. But if they can do it for you in a fraction of a second, yeah, that's a superpower, man.
Yeah, watch
Batsy, like,
his Joe Rogan podcast. He talks about it on
I'll
Joe
definitely
Rogan.
check it out. Yeah, that's definitely something I want to look into. I'm like I said a few times, I am quite frightened about it, but the potential obviously is there. Batsy, I think like this has been probably our most inspirational conversation that we've had
Oh,
so
really?
far on the show.
I'm glad.
I think like on just so many levels in terms of bringing cultural kind of importance to light and also cultural difference to the surface and kind of communicating that on a global scale. I think you've kind of defined it through this conversation as being so important and having a ripple effect that goes beyond your kind of initial kind of intent. I think that's powerful, and I think it's definitely a powerful message, which is kind of played its part kind of throughout this conversation. So I just want to say like a huge thank you for kind of blessing us with your presence on the show, having such a deep conversation about so many different topics, understanding your leadership style and how your backgrounds and culture kind of influences kind of everything that you do. I think the audience will definitely have a lot of golden nuggets from this conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I'm sure Warren has as well. Speaking on his
Certainly
behalf.
have. Yeah.
Just one last question before we end is, kind of where can people find you? How can they engage with you, and kind of find out more about what you do?
Sure, yeah. So madzonga.com is my website, Madzonga. But you can just Google Batsirai Madzonga and you'll find me on LinkedIn. I think I'm mostly on LinkedIn, so I'm not on X or Instagram really. Or Facebook. I'm more LinkedIn. So yeah, if you want to reach out to me, that's probably the best way to do it.
And we'll also leave some links to your books that you've created. We'll also leave some links to that font as well. I'm sure people would love to kind of check that one out and start using it. And yeah,
I'd appreciate
really great
Thank
having you on the show.
Thanks for having me. It's allowed me to Warren offline. This conversation has allowed me to kind of step back and just rethink what my journey has been and what I want it to be. So I got a lot out of this conversation as well. So thanks for having me on. I've got a lot to think about.
I'm glad the feeling was mutual, man. And yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, Bat.
Take care. Bye.